Okay, so we're going deep on the 2024 election. You've sent a ton of info, articles, candidate profiles.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it is. But by the end of this deep dive, you'll know everything you need to know. The players,
What they want.
right, and what it all means for the country.
One thing that's really interesting is the two-party system.
Oh, yeah.
It's been dominant for so long, and now...
It's being challenged,
Exactly.
especially with Biden dropping out and Harris taking the nomination.
Talk about a shakeup.
So let's break this whole wild 2024 race down.
This election is happening at such a crazy time. Pandemic effects,
Global conflicts.
social and economic divisions.
It's a lot. This isn't just picking a president.
It's about picking a direction for the whole country at a really crucial time.
Okay, let's get into the candidates. Starting with Trump. He wants a second term, non-consecutive, of course.
Right.
You sent over tons of material on his background. Real estate, The Apprentice.
His business dealings or something else?
Yeah, bankruptcies, lawsuits.
And those dealings. There have been accusations of fraud. And that pattern, those accusations, they kind of follow him into his political career.
His 2016 campaign definitely changed the game. Immigration, trade deals, national security.
Don't forget the impeachments.
2 of them during his presidency.
The first one was in 2019.
Yeah,
Stemmed from the situation with Ukraine.
right. And then the second one,
That was after January 6th.
the Capitol riot.
Exactly. But it's not even just those events. His embrace of far-right extremism, that increasingly violent rhetoric he uses, it raises a lot of questions about democracy itself.
That is chilling. And some sources you sent in highlight how his 2024 campaign.
It's being accused of promoting misinformation, conspiracy theories even, which just makes this whole thing even more complex.
It does. I mean, if those tactics work,
It could erode public trust even further, and then that polarization, which is already a problem.
it just gets worse.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to Kamala Harris. It was a huge deal when she stepped in after Biden dropped out. Health concern. It's historic. First female, Black, South Asian vice president.
Her background is impressive. Worked her way through California politics as a prosecutor, became San Francisco's district attorney,
And then eventually Attorney General of the state.
and then her time as vice president,
Right. She's got a depth understanding of the system.
legal and political.
So her campaign message is really interesting. Reducing inequality, expanding healthcare.
Tackling climate change.
These are core progressive issues.
Her approach to all of it is so different from Trump's.
Completely opposite on issues like climate change and immigration.
It's like two completely different visions for America.
For sure. But it hasn't been all smooth sailing for Harris. The articles point out
There's been criticism
shifting position,
on issues like healthcare.
which makes some voters question her consistency.
You know, where does she really stand? Her core beliefs, are they solid? These are things voters look for. They want a leader who is consistent. Clear vision. It's important.
Okay, now let's talk about Jill Stein. Green Party candidate. She's a doctor, long history of environmental advocacy.
She's been fighting for campaign finance reform
Against environmental racism, pollution.
for decades,
Her platform is all about the Green New Deal.
which is radical. 100% renewable energy by 2030. A federal jobs guarantee, single-payer health care, free college.
Wow. That's a complete system overhaul.
Targeting everything. The economy, inequality, climate change, social justice.
Ambitious is an understatement.
Yeah.
And speaking of ambitious, we have to talk about Chase Oliver, the libertarian candidate.
Rolling Stone called him the most influential libertarian in America.
He has been making waves, building a career advocating for individual freedom and limited government.
His focus on things like criminal justice reform, LGBTQ+ rights, and economic freedom. That's key to his platform. He wants to drastically cut government spending.
And reduce government intervention, which has implications for everything, the economy, social programs.
Everything.
It's also worth noting that he's pretty critical of U.S. foreign policy.
Especially military interventions and foreign aid.
He wants a more peaceful, hands-off approach, non-interventionist.
Right. So you can see that idea of individual liberty. It goes beyond domestic issues. It extends to how he sees America's role in the world. Less government intervention everywhere.
So here we have 4 candidates, totally different backgrounds, ideologies, visions for the future of the country.
It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. We'll unpack their specific policies next.
Stay with us.
Okay, let's dive into what these candidates actually want to do, starting with the economy. It's a big one.
Always is, especially now with inflation still a problem. Cost of living, job security, economic inequality. The articles you sent over,
Yeah, they all highlight.
those are the top concerns for most Americans.
Definitely. And we've already seen Each candidate, well, they've got a totally different approach.
For sure.
Trump, he's going with his usual playbook.
Tax cuts.
And deregulation. Thinks it'll stimulate the economy, create jobs, help out everyday Americans.
He's tried it before.
He have.
But it's been controversial. Some people say those tax cuts
They just help the wealthy.
made inequality worse, not better.
The whole trickle-down thing.
Right. Does it actually trickle down?
It's a good question to keep in mind. When you think about his policies, could they really work for everyone?
Harris wants the government to do more. Raise the minimum wage, invest in infrastructure, create green jobs.
Renewable energy.
Exactly. Her approach is all about government investment, creating jobs, boosting the economy, and tackling social issues at the same time.
Kind of like the New Deal back in the 1930s. Government spending to create jobs, build infrastructure, helped pull the country out of the Depression.
It's a stark contrast to Trump. Hands-off versus hands-on.
Yeah.
And then you've got Stein's Green New Deal.
Which takes government intervention to a whole new level.
It's not just tweaking the system.
It's a complete overhaul. Think about it. 100% renewable energy. By 2030, federal jobs guarantee everyone has a job.
Universal basic income.
A safety net.
Yeah.
For everyone.
Radical. Some would say too radical. Critics say it's just too expensive.
And disruptive.
To the entire system.
But Stein says the current system, it's not working. Not environmentally.
Or socially.
So she's going all in. Bold, transformative, for a more just and sustainable future. A gamble for sure.
Okay, then there's Oliver, the libertarian. He brings another perspective.
Totally. Wants to drastically cut government spending. Thinks cutting taxes and regulations, that's the best way. Unleash economic growth, empower individuals.
So he sees the free market as the answer.
Basically. Thinks government intervention often does more harm than good. Trust individuals and businesses to make their own decisions, without the government butting in.
4 very different approaches to the economy, each with its own benefits and risks.
For sure. It'll be interesting to see what voters think.
Which leads us to climate change, probably the biggest difference between these candidates.
Absolutely. Trump has been pretty consistent, skeptical of climate science.
Rolling back regulations, pulling out of the Paris Agreement.
Promoting fossil fuels.
His supporters say those regulations, they were killing the economy.
And that energy independence, more important than global agreements.
Well, scientists agree. Climate change is real. It's caused by humans. And it's a threat. A big one.
Ignoring it, downplaying it, could be a huge mistake. Rising sea levels, extreme weather, disruptions in agriculture.
Even migration patterns could change everything.
Right.
Harris, she takes a very different approach. She agrees with the science, wants to rejoin the Paris Agreement, invest in renewables.
Reduce emissions.
She sees climate change as an economic and social justice issue.
Definitely. Her policies, they aim to address climate change, but also create jobs in clean energy and protect communities, the ones that are hit hardest by climate change.
Stein is even more aggressive, wants complete transformation of the U.S. energy system, net zero emissions by 2030, and millions of green jobs.
Ambitious.
That's putting it mildly.
Some say it's just not possible. Too expensive. Too fast.
But she argues doing nothing is even more expensive.
More damaging. In the long run. Environmentally and economically.
Okay, Oliver, with his libertarian views, thinks the free market is the way to go.
No government mandates. No regulations.
He says they stifle innovation.
Thinks market forces will drive the development of clean technologies as they become more cost-effective. And then emissions will go down, naturally, without the government forcing it.
So we've got everything. Denial, radical transformation, and everything in between.
It's a really complex issue. Climate change, science, politics, economics, all colliding.
It shows that this election is about way more than just picking a president. It's about what kind of future we want and what role America plays in the world.
Absolutely.
Speaking of America's role, let's talk foreign policy. We've got the war in Ukraine, tension in the Middle East.
It's a lot.
Voters are paying attention to what's happening outside our borders.
For sure.
Trump's America First policy is no secret.
He doesn't really trust international alliances,
Like NATO.
likes bilateral deals.
Or transactional.
His supporters like that he challenges the status quo,
And puts America's interests first.
even if it upsets people.
But critics say it's damaged America's reputation. And it made it harder to be a leader.
They say strong alliances are key.
For global stability.
Alienating allies makes us more vulnerable.
Makes sense. Harris, she wants more collaboration, more multilateralism.
Strengthen alliances, re-engage in diplomacy.
Diplomacy.
A more cautious approach to military action. Build coalitions, work with partners.
Not going it alone.
Exactly.
Stein, as you might expect, wants to reduce military spending, end U.S. military interventions completely.
She's a pacifist.
Wants to use those resources for domestic issues. Diplomacy and cooperation are the answers.
She thinks U.S. military involvement often makes things worse.
Not better.
Right.
And Oliver, he wants to scale back our military presence abroad.
And limit foreign aid.
He thinks we should focus on defending our own borders.
And that getting involved in other countries' conflicts, it usually backfires and drains resources. Resources we could use here at home.
So again, a wide range of views. Assertive unilateralism to pacifism.
It shows that America's role in the world is constantly changing. And this election, it's going to shape how we interact with the rest of the world. Big time.
For sure. Now into gun control. Always a hot-button issue.
Trump's stance is clear. Big supporter of the Second Amendment.
No restrictions on gun ownership.
His base loves it. They see it as individual liberty.
It's protecting themselves from the government.
They say owning guns is important for self-defense. And that stricter laws, they only hurt law-abiding citizens.
But the U.S. has a lot of gun violence.
A lot.
Way more than other developed countries. And people say it's because guns are so easy to get.
They want stricter laws. Universal background checks, bans on assault weapons, high-capacity magazines.
Red flag laws.
So authorities can take guns away from people who are a danger to themselves or others.
Harris is in this camp. Stricter controls, but respecting the Second Amendment. Finding that balance between rights and safety.
Especially with all the mass shootings.
It's a tough issue. Gun control is tied to cultural values, the Constitution, and some big societal problems.
It's complicated.
Stein wants common sense solutions.
To reduce gun violence.
Without taking away the rights of responsible gun owners.
She wants to get to the root of the problem. Poverty, mental health, systemic racism.
It's not just about the guns themselves.
Right. It's about everything that leads to gun violence. A much broader approach.
Then there's Oliver. Libertarian. Opposes any gun control.
Thinks people have a right to self-defense.
And that any restrictions violate that right.
Classic libertarianism.
Yeah.
Maximum individual liberty, minimum government. He says regulating guns won't stop criminals.
It just punishes the good guys.
Exactly.
So another divisive issue. Individual rights versus collective safety.
A tension that's been around forever.
Yeah.
And it's not going away anytime soon.
Okay, let's talk about immigration. Another one that always gets people fired up. Trump's position is pretty clear.
Stricter policies?
More border security,
No.
less immigration.
Both legal and illegal.
His supporters see immigration as a threat
To national
to
security.
the economy.
They worry about jobs, strain on social services,
Yeah.
criminals, terrorists.
But the other side sees immigrants as a good thing, a vital part of America.
They help the economy, enrich our culture.
They represent hard work and opportunity, the American dream.
They say Trump's policies are cruel, inhumane, counterproductive,
They create fear and division.
and they don't really solve the problem.
Harris wants a more humane approach.
Comprehensive reform,
Create a path to citizenship.
reunite families,
Reform the courts.
make sure it's fair,
She sees it as a moral issue, treating immigrants with dignity and compassion.
but also having secure borders.
Stein wants to go even further. Decriminalize border crossings, abolish ICE, create a more welcoming system.
She thinks the current system is just broken,
Yeah.
unjust,
Yeah.
based on xenophobia.
She wants open borders.
Recognizes how much immigrants contribute to the country.
Oliver.
Open borders, free movement of people,
Yeah.
less government interference,
He says restricting immigration violates individual liberty.
and hurts the economy
Right.
by limiting the free flow of labor and talent.
So another complex issue. Immigration. National identity, economics, human rights, it's all connected.
It's about what it means to be an American, what kind of country we want to be.
This debate is going to get even more intense as we get closer to the election.
Definitely. High stakes. The future of the country is on the line.
Let's talk about the media. It shapes how we see these candidates, their campaigns,
It's so powerful these days.
the articles you sent over.
They talk about how the media shapes public opinion, filters information.
It influences how we understand politics.
For sure.
And they point out how Trump has really used the media to his advantage.
Especially social media. He knows how to grab attention, control the narrative,
And bypass traditional media.
to talk directly to his base.
It's worked for him.
But it's controversial.
Very.
On one hand, he gets his message out there unfiltered.
But it also creates a space for misinformation
Inflammatory rhetoric.
and erodes trust in institutions. It's like a double-edged sword. He reaches his supporters, but he bypasses all the checks and balances,
Fact-checking,
editorial processes.
not make sure the information is accurate.
And it's not just Trump. The way we all consume news has changed. Social media.
It's everywhere.
We're bombarded with information from all sides. Hard to know what's real.
It's a challenge for everyone.
This information landscape, it's so complex.
A fragment.
We need new skills to figure it all out.
Critically evaluate sources, recognize bias, separate fact from fiction.
Spot the fake news.
Exactly. And it matters. Misinformation can affect elections, public health.
Our understanding of the world, media literacy is more important than ever.
For sure.
We've talked about the candidates, the issues, and the media. Now let's talk about the controversies.
Because politics is never perfect.
Never. And Trump, well, he's had his fair share of controversy throughout his career.
Business and politics.
The articles you sent in,
They detail a lot of legal battles.
allegations of fraud, sexual assault, obstruction of justice.
And accusations of racism, sexism, xenophobia.
His rhetoric is divisive.
Inflammatory.
The country is divided, and these controversies are going to be a big part of the campaign.
Whether they're brought up directly or not.
They're there.
In the background. Influencing how people see him.
Harris has also been scrutinized,
Not as much as Trump.
but it's there.
Her time as a prosecutor.
People have looked closely at that.
How she handled cases involving police brutality, racial disparities in the justice system.
Some say she was too tough, didn't do enough about systemic injustices, and then her past support for the death penalty.
Which she's changed her mind about.
It raises questions about how she would handle criminal justice reform as president.
For sure.
Stein and Oliver, as third-party candidates, they haven't had the same level of scrutiny.
They haven't held those high-profile positions
But they've still been criticized,
for their policies.
which are outside the mainstream.
It's important to remember, controversies are part of politics. Nobody's perfect.
And it's up to each voter to decide how much those controversies matter.
Do they affect your view of the candidate?
It's something to think about.
Definitely.
Okay, let's move on to the debates.
High stakes.
Head-to-head.
Trying to win over voters.
It's a chance for voters to see the candidates together, hear their positions, get a sense of who they are.
How they handle themselves.
Trump has a very particular debating style.
Aggressive. Personal attacks.
Interrupting off on tangents.
His supporters see it as strength, authenticity.
He's a fighter. Doesn't play by the rules.
But critics say it's disrespectful, distracting.
Even dangerous.
It undermines the debates.
And sets a bad example.
Harris is a much more polished debater.
Of experience.
Smart, composed. She'll probably be more disciplined, more focused.
Stick to the issue.
Present a clear argument. But she also needs to connect with voters.
Emotionally.
Show her passion.
Her vision.
Stein and Oliver haven't had as many chances to debate.
They're third-party candidates. But when they have debated,
They've done well.
highlighting their unique perspectives and policies.
It's tough for them to break through.
The two-party system.
But debates can help
Show that there are other options.
introduce new ideas.
It's a good reminder that there's more to politics than just Democrats and Republicans.
For sure. The debates can show us that.
Okay, now for something that can be a bit confusing. The Electoral College.
Ah, yes. Unique to the U.S. The president isn't directly elected by the people.
It's true. Each state has a certain number of electors.
Based on population.
And the winner of the popular vote in a state.
Usually gets all of that state's electoral votes.
To win, you need a majority of the 538 electoral votes.
270.
Some people say it's undemocratic.
Because you can win the presidency without winning the popular vote.
It's happened before,
5 times.
most recently in 2016.
Trump won the Electoral College.
But Clinton won the popular vote.
Exactly. Which is why some people want to get rid of it.
They say it violates the principle of one person, one vote.
And gives too much power to swing states.
The states that could go either way.
They get all the attention.
All the money.
Which means voters in other states, the ones that are solidly red or blue,
They feel ignored.
it's complicated.
It is. But it's important to understand it could decide the election.
For sure.
Okay, so we've talked about the system, the candidates, the issues. Now what challenges does each candidate face?
Trump has the advantage of being the incumbent. Name recognition, the power of his office, a loyal base. But he's also got problems.
Like what?
The pandemic, the economy, the division in the country,
They're all working against him.
and then the legal challenges, the investigations, his approval ratings.
They've been low.
He needs to bring his base together, appeal to moderates, and change how people see him.
Not easy.
That's a tough road. But he's a good campaigner. Don't count him out.
What about Harris?
She's running against an incumbent.
Who's pretty popular with a lot of voters.
And then she has to deal with all the different factions in the Democratic Party.
All those different viewpoints.
She needs to bring them together.
Energize the base.
Get the independents on board.
Tough.
It is.
And what about Stein and Oliver?
They've got the hardest job, breaking through the two-party system.
Getting people to take them seriously.
They don't have a lot of money.
Not as much name recognition.
They need to be creative, strategic.
Tap into that voter dissatisfaction.
With the two main parties.
But all the candidates, regardless of party, they're all dealing with something new.
This global uncertainty.
The pandemic, the war in Ukraine, all this division.
Voters are anxious. They want answers. They want leadership.
Whoever can tap into that anxiety, offer a real vision for the future.
And connect with people.
They got a real shot.
High stakes. This election will change the country and its role in the world.
Okay, now let's talk about the potential impact. This is a big moment for America.
A crossroads.
The decisions made in this election will have consequences for years to come.
Absolutely.
If Trump wins,
He'll probably keep going with America first. Protectionist trade, immigration restrictions,
unilateral foreign policy,
and he'll appoint more conservative judges,
to the federal courts,
including the Supreme Court.
which could affect social and legal issues for decades.
For sure.
What if Harris wins?
More progressive policies. Clean energy, healthcare, education, criminal justice reform.
And more liberal judges.
The Supreme Court could shift. Decisions on abortion, the environment, everything could change.
It's unlikely Stein or Oliver will win,
Right.
but they can still have an impact.
They force the other parties to address issues they might ignore,
And they can take votes away from the frontrunners.
especially in close races.
They represent people who are unhappy with the two-party system,
Yeah.
looking for something different.
They show that there are other viewpoints, other solutions, beyond the usual left-right divide.
The political landscape is changing.
And that makes this election
Even more interesting.
and unpredictable.
Now let's talk about voter turnout.
Because the people who actually vote, they're the ones who decide.
Every vote counts. But historically, turnout in the U.S. is low compared to other developed countries.
People are apathetic, disillusioned with the system, and there are barriers to voting, like registration laws and access to polling places.
But if you care about the future of the country,
You have to vote.
it's your voice.
And even if you can't vote, there are other ways to get involved.
Volunteer, donate, organize, talk to your friends and family.
Every action matters.
It's about creating a culture of participation.
Yeah.
Where people feel empowered.
To make a difference.
Okay, let's zoom in on some of the swing states.
Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, they can decide the whole thing.
Those articles you sent over?
They say those are the battlegrounds. They voted for both parties in the past. They reflect the national mood.
Pennsylvania, 20 electoral votes. Both Trump and Harris need it.
It's a diverse state. Cities like Philadelphia are more Democratic.
Rural areas are more Republican.
The suburbs could decide it. They're becoming more and more competitive.
Wisconsin, 10 electoral votes, another one to watch. Went for Trump in 2016.
Flip back to the Democrats in 2020.
Trade and manufacturing jobs are big there.
Could be decisive.
Arizona, 11 electoral votes, another battleground. Growing Latino population.
More competitive for Democrats.
Immigration and border security are big issues there.
Trump's stance might appeal to some voters.
Harris's approach might appeal to others.
We'll see.
These states are going to see a lot of action in the coming months.
All the candidates will be fighting for every vote.
It's going to be a wild ride.
Definitely. And what happens in these states could affect the whole country.
For years to come.
For sure.
Let's talk about voting patterns in the past. The stuff you sent over talks about how voter turnout has gone up and down.
And how different groups have voted for different parties.
It's interesting to see how those patterns have changed, how they reflect the country's history.
Absolutely.
For example, African Americans have mostly supported Democrats.
For most of the 20th century. Because of civil rights?
But lately, some Black voters are looking at other options.
They're not happy with the Democrats.
Latinos, they've also leaned Democratic.
But that's changing too.
Some are drawn to the Republicans' focus on family and economic opportunity.
Others are worried about the Democrats' stance on abortion and religion.
And then there's the gender gap.
Women are more likely to vote Democratic.
Than men.
That gap has been getting bigger.
Especially since Trump. A lot of women saw his election as a step back.
For women's rights?
So these patterns, they're not set in stone?
They change over time. influenced by all sorts of factors.
Candidates need to understand that as they plan their campaigns.
How they target different voters.
Okay, let's talk about money in politics. It can
Yeah.
really influence elections.
It's controversial. People say wealthy individuals and corporations, they have too much power
They can influence policy decisions.
to benefit themselves.
If a candidate gets a lot of money from one industry,
They might favor policies that help that industry.
even if it hurts everyone else.
Right. And then there's Citizens United. The Supreme Court decision.
Back in 2010,
It made it easier for corporations and unions to spend money on campaigns,
led to super PACs
which can raise and spend unlimited amounts of money.
to support or oppose candidates.
A lot of people didn't like that decision.
They said it gives too much power to the wealthy.
It's like money equals free speech
Politicians are more beholden to their donors.
than to the voters.
But the other side says restricting spending violates the First Amendment.
They say unlimited spending actually makes things fairer. More voices can be heard.
It's complicated.
It is. But money matters in politics, that's for sure.
Voters need to think about that. Who are the candidates getting money from?
Yeah.
Whose interests are they really representing?
Good questions. And we need more transparency so voters know who's paying for everything.
Look, let's talk about the big issue.
The one that's hanging over everything.
Political polarization. The country is divided.
The articles you sent.
They talk about how polarization has been growing for decades.
Partisan media, gerrymandering.
Social trust is declining.
We're living in different realities.
Different facts, different news, different interpretations of events. It's hard to even talk to each other.
Compromise is impossible.
And this polarization makes it hard to solve problems.
It leads to gridlock, distrust.
Extremism.
It's a threat to democracy itself.
We need to find common ground, talk to each other, rebuild trust
In each other?
in our institutions.
It's not easy, but it's important.
Okay, and another concern that came up a lot in the articles, voter suppression?
Some states are making it harder to vote.
Voter ID laws, less early voting, purging voter rolls.
It often targets minority voters.
People say these measures are unnecessary.
Voter fraud is rare.
And these laws just make it harder for certain groups to vote, groups that are already marginalized.
The other side says it's about preventing fraud.
Protecting the integrity of elections.
They say it's not about discrimination.
It's about making sure only eligible voters are voting.
But it's a debate that often falls along party lines. Democrats against, Republicans for.
And it could affect who wins the election.
Absolutely.
Voters need to know their rights.
Know the laws in your state. Check your registration. Understand the ID requirements.
And report any intimidation or harassment.
Your vote is your voice.
Protect it.
Okay, let's talk about social media.
It's everywhere.
It's a big part of politics these days, good and bad.
It's a great way for candidates to reach voters.
Mobilize supporters.
Get their message out there.
Voters can stay informed, have discussions, organize.
But there's also a lot of misinformation.
Propaganda.
Fake news.
It's hard to know what to believe.
And the algorithms, they create echo chambers. You only see what you already agree with.
Makes the polarization worse.
Makes it hard to talk to people who think differently.
We need to be careful. Think critically.
Check your sources.
Be willing to talk to people who disagree with you. Respectfully.
And then there's the issue of foreign interference.
Another concern. Especially after 2016.
What happened with Russia?
Intelligence agencies say Russia, China, other countries, they might try to interfere again.
Spread disinformation, create chaos, undermine democracy.
It's a real threat.
It is. Our systems are vulnerable.
We can't take our democracy for granted.
We have to protect it.
From within and from outside forces.
So what can we do? How do we stay informed, make a difference?
It starts with recognizing that this isn't a spectator sport. Democracy takes work.
We have to participate.
Educate yourself. Understand the issues, the candidates, the system.
Be smart about the media. Recognize bias. Look for different viewpoints.
And then take action.
Vote, volunteer, donate, talk to people.
Everything you do makes a difference.
Let's talk about young people. They're the future.
And they have the most to lose in this election. Whatever happens now will affect them for years to come.
They'll inherit all these problems.
Climate change, inequality, polarization.
And they'll have to find the solution.
So they need to be involved.
Informed.
Empowered.
We need to encourage them to vote. Teach them about the issues. Give them a chance to participate.
It's about civic responsibility. Giving them the tools to build the future they want.
And then there's women. They've been underrepresented in politics for too long.
The gender gap in voting keeps growing.
Women are more likely to vote Democrat.
It'll probably be the same this time.
The Republican stance on abortion and reproductive rights.
That was a big factor.
And women are more affected by Poverty, healthcare, education.
Issues that Democrats tend to focus on more.
So the candidates need to listen to women.
Address their concerns.
This election could have a huge impact on women's rights.
It's important for them to make their voices heard.
And minority voters, too. They're becoming more and more influential.
African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, they could decide the election in some key states.
The candidates need to address their concerns. Racial justice, immigration, healthcare.
America is becoming more diverse.
And our politics needs to catch up.
Absolutely.
Okay, but let's be real. Elections are unpredictable.
Anything can happen.
Surprises, upsets.
Things that nobody sees coming.
That's what makes it exciting.
You can analyze, you can predict.
But in the end, it's the voters who decide.
And sometimes they surprise.
And sometimes they surprise us all.
They do.
So you never know what's going to happen.
Exactly. We have to be ready for anything.
Okay, there's also been a lot of talk about unrest after the election.
With all the division in the country and the stakes so high,
It's a valid concern,
it is. The losing side might not accept the results.
especially if it's close.
Or if there are disputes.
Protests, violence,
It's possible.
and all the misinformation online makes it worse.
Conspiracy theories.
It fuels the anger, the distrust.
It's a reminder that democracy is fragile.
It depends on all of us playing by the rules, accepting the results.
Even when we don't like them.
We need to be prepared for anything.
Stay informed.
Be aware of what's happening around you.
Avoid risky situations.
It's all about staying safe. We've covered a lot of heavy stuff today.
We have.
But let's end on a positive note.
Good idea.
American democracy is strong.
It survived a lot.
We've always come out stronger.
And we will again.
Just the fact that we're having this conversation,
Thinking critically.
talking about the issues,
It shows that we care.
we're engaged.
We're willing to do the work.
The American people, we always find a way.
We overcome adversity
We solve problems.
together.
This election is a chance for us to come together as a nation, to recommit to democracy,
To face the challenges.
to build a better future.
For everyone.
It won't be easy.
But it's worth it.
So stay informed, stay engaged.
And stay hopeful.
The future is in our hands.
It is. Let's make it a good